"What are you doing with those boxes, Gordon?" She noticed. One-eyed Sally noticed everything. "Just trying to get through this damn door." She jumped up and held the door open for me while I struggled with the empty cardboard boxes. "Tony fired me. I just needed somewhere to put my stuff." I started pulling my personal files and papers out of the drawers and throwing them into the boxes. I tried to take only what belonged to me and nothing that belonged to the company. "He can't fire you. This place will fall apart without you." I didn't answer. Without waiting for me to ask, she started helping me pack up my things. She noticed when I took a photo of my wife Laura off the desk and threw it in the trash can. One-eyed Sally had been my secretary for 2 years. I would miss her. She had one glass eye that never seemed to sit right. It looked like it had a life of its own. For some reason, it often teared up, so she was always wiping it and putting drops in it. 3 years ago, Sally was in an accident. She lost her husband and her right eye. Now she was forced to work in this damp room to feed her 2 young sons, 8-year-old Brian and his younger brother Greg, who was 2. "Gordon, what the hell happened? You just went home to get your glasses. He can't fire you for that." I gathered my few belongings. I only needed 1 box. "Tony Monsanto and Laura were in our bed when I came home. They weren't doing anything, but they were both naked." "He fired you because he caught him in bed with your wife?" "Not exactly. First I told him to get out of my house, and then he fired me." "He didn't leave?" "Laura and Tony were still in our bed when I left. Tony laughed as I walked out the door." One-eyed Sally put her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. I smiled and walked out of the building. Monsanto Mowers would have to do without Gordon Livingston. I didn't think they'd be too upset about it. My brother Shelton wasn't home, but his wife Joyce gladly offered me the guest room. Shelton was working the early shift at the tire factory and wouldn't be back until noon. Joyce cheered me up with coffee and a warm shoulder to cry on until Shelton returned. After a quick lunch, we went to my house to pick up my things. Tony was gone, and Laura was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine. "What the hell are you doing home in the middle of the morning, Gordon?" I couldn't believe she asked me such a stupid question. "I was afraid Tony ran out of condoms. I just brought him another dozen." "Don't be clever. It's not that important, and it's nothing new." "What do you mean?" "Tony was going to fire you 2 years ago. He agreed to keep you on if I slept with him. I did it so you could keep your job." "You mean you've been sleeping with him for the last 2 years?" Laura looked at me with a slight smile and finished her drink. "Well, it wasn't that bad. You kept your job, and I got to spend time with Tony. Now that I've lost my job, will you stop seeing him?" "Don't be silly. Why would I do that?" I couldn't believe what she had just said, but a lot of things became clear. I looked at Shelton, and we both went to the bedroom to gather my things. There was nothing in the house I wanted to take with me, so it didn't take long. Since I wasn't very handy, there weren't many tools or power tools. The last thing I took out was my desktop computer. Laura had been sitting at the kitchen table the whole time. Somehow her glass was full again. She didn't say anything else while we were there. Laura didn't look very well. She had long hair dyed a strange black color. She looked like a goth or a witch. Her skin was olive-colored, but her face was thin, which gave her a harsh appearance. She stared straight at the wall to avoid meeting my gaze, and her lips were pressed together. I couldn't tell if she was angry at me for leaving or for catching her with her lover. It didn't matter. Shell and I stopped and had a beer to celebrate the successful completion of the move. It was a pathetic excuse to drink in the middle of the day. The house was rented out. Thank God for small things. It took about an hour to turn off all the utilities. I even got a few deposits back. Next up were the bank accounts and credit cards. I left Laura half of my savings and checking accounts. When we got home, Joyce had made a great dinner. Later that night, Shelton helped me get drunk and put me to bed. It was my first hangover in years. I wasn't counting on severance pay from Monsanto Mowers, but I had enough money in my savings account to live on for a few months. Unemployment benefits were out of the question, so I had to look for another job. I decided to start by filing for divorce. That took all morning. After lunch, I went to the state employment office, hoping to find something there. "Hi, Gordon. What a surprise." One-eyed Sally was standing in front of me with a clipboard. "Did you quit?" "Number, I was replaced by some busty woman with long hair." I just shook my head. It was a dirty move on Tony's part. Sally had nothing to do with it, and it was unfair to fire her. "What exactly happened?" "You were replaced by Tony's brother, Carmine, and I was replaced by Carmine's girlfriend. I left before the end of the day." "I'm very sorry. How can I help?" "Can you give me a recommendation?" We both laughed a little at that. One-eyed Sally and I sat down together and filled out mustard-colored forms with information about our previous jobs. I don't think either of us believed in the system, but we felt we had to go through the motions. Before leaving, I gave her a couple $100 and my phone number. She resisted a little, but finally took it, quietly saying, "Thank you." A single mother with 2 young sons and no job had a difficult life ahead of her. I spent the next week trying to find work in the area, but to no avail. After a desperate call from Laura saying that her utilities had been cut off, I changed my cell phone number. Simmons Farm Equipment was about 3 miles out of town. Most of the farms in the area had been sold to developers. Where corn once grew, there were now ranches. Everything about the place said that its best days were behind it. The buildings needed repairs and new signs. The parking lot was in even worse shape than the buildings. Even the windows needed cleaning. Despite its dismal appearance, this was my last chance. Earl Simmons was well over 60 and significantly overweight. He sat at the table like Santa Claus without a beard. I was dressed for an interview, so he immediately realized that I wasn't interested in buying farm equipment. "If you're not buying, you must be selling. I'm not interested." Can't argue with that. I just wanted a free cup of coffee. My blunt reply was rewarded with a barely perceptible smile, and he pointed to the coffee pot in the corner. I sat down opposite the owner, picked up a styrofoam cup in greeting, and nodded. "Thanks. Nice way to end a bad week." Earl Simmons looked at me in surprise. "I don't know you. Are you the living good who works at Monsanto? Am I right?" "Livingston. I used to work at Monsanto. Now I don't work anywhere." After a short pause, he said, "I never liked that Monsanto guy, or his brother for that matter." We sat there for a few minutes without saying a word, just enjoying our coffee. "Are you sure you don't want to buy a combine from me? I can offer you a good price on last year's model." His eyes lit up. Maybe he was Santa Claus? I looked around the room. Outside the window, I saw a large warehouse and an even larger storage yard. It seemed that there were no goods here. The showroom was completely empty. I assumed he had sold all his merchandise due to low sales. I knew nothing about agricultural machinery, but something didn't feel right. His loud voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "It seems like you're thinking about buying this place. Are you going to make me an offer?" "In my dreams." Simmons leaned back in his chair and smiled. 7 or 8 years ago, Monsanto was going through a rough patch. It only started to succeed after it hired you. Am I right? He was right, but I couldn't admit it. I knew what I had done for Tony, and apparently others had noticed too. I could only smile and toss my empty glass into the trash can. I was still smiling when I stood up to leave. "Don't rush, Mr. Livingood. Maybe we can work something out." Livingston, Gordon Livingston. 2 hours later, Earl Simmons and I had reached an agreement. He had big plans, but he needed someone like me to make them happen. He was a thrifty man, so money was no object. I was ready and able to help him, but on one condition: I could hire my assistant. One-eyed Sally would be a happy woman. That evening, I invited Shelton and Joyce to Red Lobster. The setbacks Laura had caused us quickly faded away. I think Sally was happier than I was when I called her. When we got home, Laura was waiting for me. She spent 20 minutes trying to convince me to take her back. It seemed that Tony wasn't very interested in supporting his wife, his family, or Laura. I listened politely to all her arguments, smiled, and went into the house. I didn't say a word. The next few weeks were very stressful. The main building was made of concrete blocks. The second floor was a 3-room apartment that had been used as a storage room for the last 20 years. Earl was more than happy to let me live there for free. One-eyed Sally helped me find a stove, refrigerator, and washing machine. Sally and I cleaned and painted the office and apartment. I hired a couple of high school students to paint all the buildings. Earl never complained about the expense. It was a lot of fun, but eventually we had to get down to business. Laura called Joyce and told her she had received the divorce papers and signed them. It was all pretty simple since we didn't have a house or kids. I had already given her half of my assets. Not much for 12 years of marriage, but it was all she deserved. One-eyed Sally was a skinny girl with bad teeth and an artificial eye. She had dirty blonde hair and looked like she had never been to a beauty salon in her life. She clearly didn't know how to apply makeup. She always looked clean, but she needed to take better care of herself. All of this was made up for by her honey voice on the phone and her work ethic, which made me ashamed of myself. Her computer skills were outstanding, as were her accounting abilities. To me, she was the embodiment of a dream. One of the advantages of working for someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone else is that they usually aren't. At Monsanto Mowers, there was no confidentiality policy or non-disclosure agreement. Tony didn't need all that nonsense because he was the boss. Unfortunately for Tony, that also meant that Sally and I had room to maneuver. Sally sent letters to all the wholesalers we worked with and all the retailers we dealt with. She simply explained that Tony and I no longer worked for Monsanto Mowers and could not provide them with services. She was very careful to avoid offering any services. Meanwhile, I called all of Earl's acquaintances to find out who was still working. Most of the customers had gradually passed away over the years, and some had closed their businesses altogether. As for Earl, he believed that the agricultural equipment business was dead. He had no desire to revive it. I came across a Korean manufacturer looking for distributors for lawn mowers in the U.S. They weren't very complicated, but they were sturdy and inexpensive. It was the perfect product for small municipalities and school districts. After a 30-minute phone conversation, I ordered 50 units from California on consignment. We had room to store them and didn't have to put any money down. They sent a box of advertising brochures by express mail, and One-Eyed Sally got right to work. By the time the first shipment arrived, we had 6 orders. The next week, Sally started calling everyone on the mailing list. I don't know who was happier, the wholesalers or the retailers. She was just laying the groundwork, and she was good at it. We wanted to get into the residential lawn care market, but we weren't opposed to a little expansion. Several companies that manufactured rotary cultivators tried to convince Tony to sell their products, but he didn't want anything to do with it. By the end of the first week, I had already closed deals with 3 of them. 2 of them were willing to work on a consignment basis. The showroom on the first floor was ready to receive the merchandise. I didn't think it would be garden equipment, but Earl was thrilled. One-Eyed Sally surprised me by signing a contract with 2 chainsaw manufacturers. An old friend of Earl's arrived with a truck loaded with new shredders. He also agreed to sell them on consignment. In the blink of an eye, Earl had a stock of new merchandise. On Monday morning, Earl introduced me to our new salesman. He was a retiree who agreed to work exclusively on commission. He said that if he didn't sell anything, he didn't want to be paid. On his first day, he sold 3 lawn mowers and 1 shredder. Business was getting better and better. One-Eyed Sally was so busy that she asked if she could come to work on Saturday. I didn't mind, as I was planning to stay anyway. There was no school or kindergarten on the weekend, so she had to bring the boys to work with her. I've always loved children. They spent most of the day in the apartment watching TV, but I think what they enjoyed most was going with Earl to the backyard to look for groundhogs. Sally said they talked about it all the way home. A few weeks later, Sally's boys started their summer vacation. She brought them to work every day. Earl kept them busy in the yard most of the time. The business was located on Earl's old family farm, which was actually an orchard. There were old apple trees growing on the hillside, most of them dead or dying. I put a bunk bed in one of the extra rooms for the boys. I bought another one for the other room, just in case. It wasn't hard to convince Sally and the boys to stay the night. Since the nearest elementary school was highly rated, it wasn't difficult to convince Sally to move into the apartment before the new school year started. Come to think of it, I think it was her idea. How did she do that? I was rewarded for my suggestion with a little kiss. Things were looking up. One day, Tony found out where I worked. A girl named Carmina had been using the company computer to download pornography and had infected it with several viruses. Tony asked me to come and restore the system. I think he heard me laughing when I hung up the phone. He was lucky I didn't sue him for alienation and wrongful termination. Earl paid for the company's health insurance for many years, even when he had no employees. When Sally found out she now had dental insurance, she was thrilled. She started going to the dentist once a week. At first, nothing was noticeable, but with each passing week, she looked better and better. The big change came when Earl made an appointment for her to see an optometrist. It turned out that her dentures had been fitted incorrectly. After she got the right dentures, they were almost invisible. One-eyed Sally was now just Sally. For her birthday, Earl and I gave her a day at the Elizabeth Arden Beauty Salon. I had to drive her to Philadelphia. The boys and I spent the day at the zoo while their mom enjoyed being pampered. It was a wonderful time. Laura called and asked for help. Her car had been repossessed for non-payment, and her cell phone had been cut off. She had moved into a furnished studio apartment and was already behind on the rent. I gave her all the furniture from my house. I have no idea what she did with it. Tony wasn't answering her calls, and she wasn't allowed into the company building. I tried to be polite and understanding, but I explained that I couldn't help her. She didn't like that answer, but she had no other options. There was 1 week left until the divorce was final. I was counting the days. We hoped that thanks to the retailers, the business would start to grow, but it turned out to be the opposite. The first to contact us was Tornado, a lawnmower manufacturer. There were 9 retailers in the area who worked through Monsanto mowers. They were unhappy and wanted a change. 6 of them knew about our new company and recommended that Tornado contact us. By the end of the day, we were the official wholesale distributor of Tornado lawnmowers in 3 counties. We had our first real chance. The next day, my divorce was finalized. After that, things started to fall into place. One by one, wholesale and retail dealers who had previously worked with Monsanto mowers came over to us. Sally was able to hire a girl to help out in the office. A few weeks later, I happened to hear a noise coming from the equipment warehouse. 2 men got out of a pickup truck and took something out of the back. A moment later, 2 bottles of incendiary mixture flew across the yard. The pair of arsonists waited for the fireballs to ignite, then ran back to the pickup truck. But it was too late. Before they could reach the vehicle, they heard 2 shots from a shotgun, and the front tires of their pickup truck deflated like pancakes. I turned on the outside lights, and there stood Earl, laughing. 2 shadows raced down the road at lightning speed. The police had no trouble finding the owner of the truck. He couldn't wait to turn in the Monsanto brothers, who had paid him for the job. That was pretty much the end of Monsanto mowers. The few remaining customers switched to us within a week. Tony ended up in jail, but I don't know for how long. Carmine disappeared. The damage to the parking lot was superficial and covered by insurance. Earl strutted around like a peacock, delighted that his old business was thriving again. He offered advice from time to time, but always tried not to interfere. Now we had a foreman who could translate from Spanish when necessary. One of our mechanics was a graduate of the local technical college, and the other was an old fart. They complemented each other perfectly. Sally became an expert on payroll and taxes in no time. Shelton and Joyce came to visit us about once a month. It was nothing special, but it was nice to have someone to talk to. Earl had lost his wife more than 10 years ago. They had no children. We were always happy to see him when we had guests. Laura seemed to have disappeared. After Sally moved in with us, we became closer. At first, we just sat and watched TV after the boys went to bed. Sometimes we both fell asleep on the couch and woke up in each other's arms. We started kissing as if to thank each other for some small favor. Without realizing it, I started kissing her on the cheek when she left with the boys to go shopping or somewhere else. In early December, Sally told me it was time for Brian to move into his own room. I agreed, of course. That same day, she moved all her things into my room. I should have guessed. After the boys went to bed, she took me by the hand and led me to the bedroom. I was ashamed of my stupidity, but I was thrilled that she had taken the initiative. The day before Christmas, the local justice of the peace quietly married us. We didn't tell anyone, but the next day Earl saw the ring on Shelley's finger. It was a wonderful holiday. Business was booming. When spring came, Earl announced that he was moving to Florida. He had a sister who lived near Ocala and had been urging him to move there for years. I was afraid his move would cause problems, but Earl had everything under control. He transferred the real estate and the business to Sally and me. All we had to do was send him 10% of our monthly income until he died. It was an offer we couldn't refuse. He didn't need the 10% because he had accumulated considerable wealth over the years. It was more of a symbolic gesture so that we would always remember him. It wasn't necessary, but we understood. The farmhouse was much more spacious than the apartment. It took us a whole month to repaint everything before we could move in. I never understood what Earl had against painting. The week we finally moved in, Sally found out she was pregnant. Brian and Greg were as excited as I was. It was hard to imagine that just a short time ago my life had been in ruins. It's funny how things turned out. I hope the new baby has 2 eyes.